I felt compelled to notify Congress and blow the whistle. I spent 40 years of my life clearing my name because obviously they alleged that I was lying, that they would never do such thing. So there were some people who thought I betrayed colleagues who I worked with or friends. The reality is I raised my hand and I swore an oath to the people of the United States. The Constitution is a symbol of the people.
Welcome to the Thought Leader Revolution with Nikki Ballou. Join the revolution. There's never been a better time in history to speak your truth, find your freedom, and make your fortune. Each week, we interview the world's top thought leaders and learn the secrets of how they built a 6 to 7 figure practice. This episode has been brought to you by eCircleAcademy.com, the proven system to add 6 to 7 figures a year to your thought leader practice.
Welcome to another exciting episode of the podcast, The Thought Leader Revolution. I'm your host, Nikki Ballou. And boy, do we have an amazing guest lined up for you today. Today's guest is a friend of the show's. He's a man who has played a pivotal role in an important moment in American history, and he's built himself quite the reputation as a result. I am speaking, of course, of none other than the one, the only, the legendary Peter Forcelli. Welcome to the show, Peter.
Thanks for having me here. I don't know about legendary, but it's an honor to be here.
It's an honor to have you here. So, Peter, buddy, you and I spoke off camera, and let's just get right to it, man. Tell us your story. What is it that thrust you into the limelight as the great Peter Forcelli?
Sure. Well, what happened was I was a police officer and a special agent with ATF in New York City for 22 years and promoted and went out to Arizona. And look, I saw how policing is supposed to work. When I got out to Arizona, I saw some things that blew my mind. I saw federal prosecutors not prosecuting firearms traffickers, making up excuses as to why they couldn't take those cases. One of those excuses was once the guns made their way to Mexico, they couldn't prosecute a case because guns are smuggled. We didn't always know about the smuggling until after it happened. But their excuse was once the gun made its way to Mexico, that the case was unprosecutable. Well, in 2009, my group's focus changed to focus on home invasion robbery investigations because Phoenix led the United States in home invasion robberies and kidnappings. They were second in this hemisphere behind Mexico City, which is a much larger city. So it was something that had to be addressed. And so a new group was stood up to deal with the Mexico-bound firearms trafficking. And they started this case called Operation Fast and Furious, which started in roughly October of 2009. And none of us knew what was going on until a Border Patrol agent named Brian Terry was murdered with a gun that we learned ATF let right off into the sunset. Because when we would get calls from gun dealers about suspicious purchases, we would stop cars, ask questions, and seize firearms and refer people for prosecution all the time. Very often those people weren't prosecuted, but we would have those guns in our custody. They would be in evidence. They would never hurt anybody. So the whole philosophy behind this new group's methodologies was troublesome to me because it really just jeopardized public safety in the United States and in Mexico. And the prosecutors who for years wouldn't take the cases because the guns made their way to Mexico were part of the strategy to allow the guns to go to Mexico, hoping that they could trace them back from crime scenes tied to cartels. The problem is when guns are recovered in Mexico, they're often recovered after shootings or after gun battles with Mexican military, Mexican law enforcement. So, you're basically tying these guns to dead bodies, which was reprehensible. So once we found out about Brian Terry's death and what they were doing in that group, I felt compelled to notify Congress and blow the whistle. And, as a result, the government doesn't like when you spill some of their secrets. I spent 40 years of my life clearing my name because obviously they alleged that I was lying, that they would never do such thing. And amazingly, some of those declinations for the cases I spoke of that they said that they never declined were in writing. We'd witnesses to many of these declinations as well. So the government really dropped the ball and endangered the public in this now ill-fated investigation that became a national or actually international scandal because, obviously it involved dead bodies in the United States, being that Border Patrol agent, and countless dead bodies in Mexico. And the sad part is guns don't biodegrade. They don't evaporate. They're not apples or eggs. So those guns will continue to turn up long after I'm dead, even if I die an old man. So, it's really just a horrible scandal and a horrible stain on the reputation of American law enforcement. But I felt compelled to tell the truth about it.
Good for you, man. That took big brass balls in order to do so. what was the reaction of your superiors when you did this?
Well, truthfully, it was mixed. Like, and that's the thing. I think I was blessed when it comes to whistleblowers because some are just crushed. But what that group did was so against the grain of what my fellow agents believed in that, it had a kind of a mixed bag reaction. Like the command staff in Phoenix was removed and a new command staff was put in place. And one of them was a gentleman named Tom Brandon, Michigan guy from Detroit area. And, it's funny because when I told him I was going to testify in front of Congress, he handed me a St. Michael Challenge coin, very Catholic, very devout Catholic, in fact, handed me the St. Michael Challenge coin and said, listen, as long as you're telling the truth, I have your back. Run to the truth. Are they going to throw fastballs at you? You're going to have to hit them out of the park. So I had people like Tom who were advocates. And then I had others who felt like, hey, you shouldn't be talking bad about what other people do, or some people liked the folks that were involved in that case because they weren't necessarily bad people, certainly very misguided. So, some folks, and I knew them, that some of them were friends, but, you can't tolerate that sort of behavior, friends or no friends. So there were some people who thought I betrayed colleagues who I worked with or friends. So, but the reality is I raised my hand and I swore an oath to the people of the United States when I raised my hand and swore an oath to the Constitution, right? The Constitution is a symbol of the people. So I just felt I did what the taxpayers expected me to do. And I had some allies as a result, and I had many enemies. But the strange thing was, like, because I was out there for years and saw what I saw, and Tom Brandon and some of the other folks who had my back weren't there, they couldn't necessarily fight for me, but they absolutely gave me top cover, and they gave me the space to fight for myself, which a lot of whistleblowers don't get. So in many ways, it was a challenge that myself and my family went through. But in many other ways, I was blessed to have good people who had my back.
That's amazing, man. When you go into public service in the United States, I've noticed that everyone swears a very similar oath. Everyone says that they swear to protect and defend the Constitution of the United States from all enemies, foreign and domestic, right?
Yes.
And it's a very simple yet powerful oath. There's no room for ambiguity in that oath, right? There's no, unless they're my friends, unless they're part of the hierarchy, there's no ambiguity there, right? It's just all enemies, foreign and domestic. And it strikes me that these folks that were allowing this illegal gun trafficking by known transnational criminal organizations to take place under their nose were subverting the U.S. Constitution. Am I mistaken?
Well, they were allowing things to happen that I think jeopardized parts of the United States Constitution. Like, for example, this firearms trafficking to Mexico. Right now, in fact, this week that just passed, the United States Supreme Court heard arguments where the government of Mexico was suing members of the United States gun industry. And the amazing thing to me is the only firearms dealer they named in their arguments before the court, Mexico, that being Mexico, was a dealer who was cooperating with ATF when we were interdicting guns and who was told to continuing to sell guns to known traffickers by this new group when they knew those guns weren't being interdicted. So I think it jeopardized the Second Amendment. And look, I believe that the agents in that group, their goal was to try to take down a cartel using a different strategy. Because again, when we were seizing the guns and we were getting confessions, the prosecutors weren't prosecuting cases. And this went on for years. So, we still took some cases to state prosecutors. We still seized those guns so they weren't going to hurt anybody. And they stayed there forever because no one was going to trial. But I think that their intentions were to take down a cartel. And it was just an incredibly misguided and vile way to try to, I guess, reinvent the wheel. So I don't know if their intent was to subvert the Constitution, but they certainly jeopardized parts of it in doing what they did.
Well, intention, they say the road to hell is paved with good intentions, right? Intention doesn't really matter, legally speaking. What matters is the result. And the result here is there were laws that were broken, right? Am I mistaken in this?
Well, they allowed laws to be broken continually. A straw purchaser, for example, is someone who buys a gun with the intent on giving that gun to somebody else, a trafficker, or sometimes a felon. So one straw purchaser in that case alone purchased over 800 firearms, not in one shot. Over a course of many, many, many months before the federal prosecutors felt he was worthy of indictment. And when you think about this, how many guns did he use before he was arrested, or rather trafficked, that were used to kill people before he was arrested. We know that Brian Terry, a Border Patrol agent, a U.S. law enforcement officer, was one. But in Mexico, there were countless bodies, police officers, military, tied to these guns. Helicopters, Mexican helicopters were shot down with guns that were trafficked as part of that program. So, I mean, it was catastrophic, in so many ways. The loss of life, the relations between the United States and Mexico, the reputation of U.S. law enforcement as a result. So there is no justification. I will never defend that program or the stupidity of the people involved in it. And we've had 14 years to think about it, and I still can't understand their strategy, how it would have worked. Because the Drug Enforcement Administration, with the drug laws, very powerful drug laws in the United States, the DEA has very big networks of informants in Mexico. They have vetted units of Mexican soldiers that they work with. ATF has none of those things. So the whole concept itself was, I don't know of another word other than idiotic.
Well, if you are a law enforcement officer and you knowingly let people break the law, isn't that in itself against the law?
Yes, it is. You're supposed to have permission from federal prosecutors, which they had. And that's the other thing that I want to point out. Like, you always hear about scandals involving the police or federal agents. Rarely do you hear the complicity of federal prosecutors in some of these scandals. And in this one, I would argue that it was a 50-50 level of culpability. Because listen, again, we never asked for permission to stop a car containing illegal guns that we knew were going to cartels. We didn't call a prosecutor and ask for permission. And when they wouldn't prosecute, we would try to take those cases to the county. So the fact, or the state sometimes, so the fact that these ATF agents were going to listen to these prosecutors is not a defense, because they could have taken another path. The path of letting guns fall into the hands of cartels is never the proper path. Never, ever. You'll never convince me otherwise.
So isn't it against the law for a prosecutor to not prosecute someone?
No. And that's the thing that blows my mind. Like, you hear a lot of arguments in the United States about, you probably heard qualified immunity, which protects law enforcement. And that's when the law enforcement officer makes an honest mistake, acting in good faith. They're following their agency's policies. They're following the law. What happens is that officer is entitled to have representation in court. If they did that, they can be prosecuted for not following policy or not following the law. In the United States, judges and prosecutors have absolute immunity. So what they do is they fall back on, hey, we use prosecutorial discretion. 800 firearms before it's time to indict somebody goes far beyond prosecutorial discretion. So when you talk about fixing the criminal justice system in the United States, we talk very often about police. We don't talk enough about holding attorneys accountable, prosecuting attorneys, and sometimes even judges. Sometimes judges, make decisions that are way outside of our laws and our Constitution, and it's basically allowed.
Yeah, that's ridiculous. I think President Trump and his administration need to do something about that.
Yeah.
There was a prosecuting attorney back in the George Bush administration. I think was his last name Fitzgerald or Fitzpatrick? He was from Chicago.
Yes.
Yeah. Yeah. I got to tell you, that guy belongs in a prison cell for the rest of his life, as far as I'm concerned. The things that he did were criminal. If he did not have the shield of his office protecting him, he would have been thrown in jail for what he did. The way that he went after people, the way that he went after ruining their lives, he belongs in a jail cell. And it boggles my mind that this doesn't happen. So one of the cases that I followed myself for many, many years is the case of Conrad Black, who comes from my country, Canada. He was the chairman of a publicly traded company called Hollinger Inc. that bought all these small newspapers back in the 80s and 90s. And the former chairman of the SEC got a hard-on for him and went after him. And this prosecutor was one of the prosecutors that went after him. And man, they hounded him and threw him in jail, even though he made his shareholders hundreds of millions of dollars. Like, this guy didn't hurt anybody. In fact, he enriched everybody involved. And they just wanted a big scalp. There was a time where that was going to be good for their career. So they went after a guy, they got a big scalp. And he went to jail. He was finally pardoned. and got out of prison, but he should have never been in there first place. And the fact that someone was able to do this to him blew me away. Absolutely blew me away.
Let's look at this. No one was killed, right? No one was in the jeopardy of losing their life as a result, and he was prosecuted. And then you look at Arizona, where you had countless, and I mean dozens upon dozens of firearms traffickers trafficking to not just one cartel, but to several cartels who weren't prosecuted. So it tells you how messed up our system is when those priorities are askew. But yeah, I mean, a lot of it is politically driven, unfortunately. And you bring up Chicago. In 2014, I was actually assigned to be the ATF representative to Canada, to Eastern Canada. So I covered from Manitoba to the Maritimes. Wonderful place to work. I love the Canadian police officers there. Toronto Police Service, worked with them every day. OPP. In fact, the weapon that's on a plaque behind me, it's not an actual functioning gun. It was given to me by the Ontario Provincial Police when I left Canada. But while I was up there, I was sent to Chicago. Right. So we talk about Chicago, how they prosecuted this gentleman involved in that particular incident. The reason I was sent there was ATF wanted to go after people who were shooting other people in Chicago. And one of the things that they wanted to do was replicate some of the stuff that we had done in New York, which was before I went to Phoenix, which was to go after felons that were caught with guns and to interview them and find out what other crimes they knew about. And we were solving all kinds of cases. Again, nothing fancy. This is routine police work. And going to Chicago, where they were so willing to prosecute that gentleman, they weren't willing to prosecute armed criminals because they felt it was beneath them. So again, the system is not just, I mean, it's the Department of Justice. And I think in many parts of the country, they do a great job. In some other parts of the country, they don't. And in many instances, it's politically motivated.
Yeah, 100%. 100%. It boggles my mind. So when you went to Congress, who in Congress really championed your cause and who was trying to rattle your credibility to the ground?
Well, it was actually Senator Chuck Grassley's office. He's a big, he put together a lot of laws that pertain to whistleblower protection. That's his cause du jour, as whistleblower protection has been for many decades. So he was already catching wind of some of the stuff that was happening in Phoenix. So I contacted him. Now, at the time, he was the ranking member of Senate Judiciary, so he didn't have subpoena authority. So he had to reach out to Darrell Issa from California, who was the chairman of the Oversight Committee. And this way they can issue me a subpoena to kind of cover me in some ways.
Yeah.
But I had the Republicans were on my side. The Democrats weren't, which was what was interesting is because what was going on is they were trying to skew the narrative that this whole thing was started by Barack Obama and pushed down. And then the Democrats were saying, no, this started under George Bush and it continued through Obama. The reality is it started in Phoenix during Obama's term. It was not going on before Obama came into office. And I'm not saying that Barack Obama knew about it when it started, but I certainly can say without hesitation that he held no one accountable, nor did Eric Holder, which is what you would expect from leadership. I mean, I served in a leadership position for many years, and I always felt I have to hold myself accountable and my people accountable. Yes. But when no one's held accountable, then a message is kind of sent out there that you can do whatever you'd like.
That's a terrible message to send.
Yes.
That's a terrible message to send. So Chuck Grassley seems like for a politician, he's a pretty honorable guy. Is that your take on him as well?
Well, I got to know his staff very well because you don't deal with the actual politicians. You know what I mean? Like I've met them. I've had one or two conversations. I dealt with Chuck Grassley's staff extensively. In fact, I still speak to them to this day, and they're all gone. They've left, government service. They're all doing. One is an elected representative on the state level in West Virginia. Another gentleman runs a whistleblower advocate firm. And what they described him as, apparently he's not one of the politicians who went out and socialized and had sit-down dinners with sponsors and donors. Apparently he's a guy who would come in, did his business, and went home to his wife in Iowa. Gentleman, older guy. I mean, God bless him. I think he's in his 90s and he's still doing what he's doing. Don't know if I'll be working past 70 if I can avoid it. But apparently he's an honorable man and is dedicated to the cause of protecting government whistleblowers. I wish the government would actually take people who step forward for the right reasons and protecting them a lot more seriously than they do. Because the reality is most people who did right, they run out of government and their lives are ruined and they're almost bankrupted. Look, we were almost bankrupted and I spent 4 years fighting to clear my name. But I got off very, very easy when you look at how some other whistleblowers are treated. And again, I think it's partially because I had some people who actually had my back and gave me that space to fight for my reputation. But many other times people will just crush you because they're worried about how it will affect them. And that's not leadership. If you're not protecting someone who's telling the truth because you're worried about how it might reflect on you, then shame on you. You're no leader.
So, Peter, I'm sure you have some strong opinions about what needs to happen to clean up the justice system in the United States. And I'm sure you've got some strong opinions about what the average person in the public needs to do to educate themselves. And I'd love to hear those.
Well, I think the first thing that folks need to do is stop watching the news, because the news will pull you in any one direction or another. The reality is I work with some very, very honorable people in government. And I've worked with some people who were, about themselves. It was like they wouldn't have blown the whistle because they would have been worried about how it might affect their next career move. And I've seen people who make their every decision every single day looking at exactly that, where they won't hold a bad employee accountable because they're afraid if that employee files a grievance on them, it might stick to them and affect their reputation. But I would say that a good 70 to 80% of the people who I went to work with came in and really gave, a good day's effort. Some of them were superstars. And then there are some who weren't so great. The problem is the civil service laws protect those people, and it's incredibly difficult to get rid of the bad employees. But I mean, even when you look at the current political system now, today, Donald Trump, for example, you mentioned President Trump earlier, what his administration can do. He's portrayed as almost like this demonic person in certain media channels down here. I met President Trump during his first term because I was in charge of ATF's Miami office when the Parkland shooting happened.
Yep.
And he came down and I met with, he was the president at the time. I met with him, Senator Rubio, who was a senator at the time. Pam Bondi was in Florida. I don't believe she was still the attorney general, and Governor Scott was still the governor.
Yep.
And, while this whole shooting was going on, they came down, I believe it was 2 or 3 days later. There were other politicians who came down and they just were spewing, talking points. None of them asked a single question. It was all about, they're ban the gun, and then they'll say, we need to arm all the teachers. I don't agree with either of those philosophies. But what I really respected was that Donald Trump came in the room with myself, the FBI special agent in charge, and the sheriff from Broward County at the time, and he asked a ton of questions. He didn't spew out a single talking point. He just asked really tough questions. Some of them, candidly, didn't have the answer for, because some of them involved, how do you fix the mental health problems in the United States? How do you get the mental health system to communicate with, the criminal history system? So, I mean, these are things that, when I say above my pay grade, I truly mean that. It's things that would require congressional involvement and the Senate to approve. But he asked those questions. And then after he came out of the room with us, he went into a much larger room with people who weren't supervisors. They were line level police officers, firefighters, EMTs. And he asked some of them the same questions. And I was like, something, here's a man who was compassionate. He came there looking to find solutions and asked whoever he thought might have some contribution to do that, where all the other politicians just came down and acted like politicians. And then I saw him interact with some of the families, and he was incredibly compassionate to the families of these 16 dead teenagers and the dead coach. And then when you see how they portray him on television, it's deceiving. And I think that when you watch the news, I think they deceive a lot. And I truly mean both sides. They deceive a lot. Where I would love to see a lot more truth being told. And I would like to see the government, I'd like to see leaders actually lead. Because when you're not holding people accountable because you're afraid it might affect your next career move or stick to you, then the government kind of goes a little bit out of control.
Peter, I am a Trump superfan. I love President Trump. He endorsed one of my books that I wrote. I'll show it to you. I have written 2 books with a talk show host named Wayne Allen Root. This one is called The Great Patriot Boycott Book. It's a list of 123 patriotic American companies that you should give your money to that are not woke. And over here in this black starburst is endorsed by President Donald J. Trump on Truth Social on May the 7th, 2023. So Wayne is a personal friend of the president's. He handed him a copy of the book, and the president put it on Truth Social. So God bless President Trump, as far as I'm concerned. And more to the point, I've been following his career since the 80s. He's a real guy. He's a real guy. He's a guy with an ego So am I. So are you. So's anybody with
Right.
any modicum of ambition. But he knows when to put his ego aside to stand up for what's right. And what you described about how he treated people is what countless people that I know who know him personally, including Wayne, say he's like. So I'm not at all surprised by what you said. And here's the truth. The traditional legacy media is dying and it's on its last legs. Right now, I don't watch any of the traditional legacy media. I sometimes watch certain shows on Fox. I like Greg Gutfeld. I like
Yeah.
I like The Five. I like Hannity. But that's about it. Other than that, I don't watch any legacy media whatsoever. I listen to Joe Rogan. I listen to Theo Vaughn. I go listen to Ben Shapiro from time to time, Tucker Carlson. That's where I get my news from. And I don't just listen to whatever they say and accept it verbatim. I think about it. I debate it in my own mind and I make up my own mind. And that's what I think you're saying is citizens need to stop listening to legacy media. They need to start listening to independent voices, but they shouldn't just uncritically accept whatever they hear. They should think about it and make up their own mind. It's good for you to think, isn't it?
I couldn't have said it better myself, because what you're saying is exactly what I feel to my core. Like, we need to be true to ourselves, right? But to be true to ourselves, we need to understand what's happening around us. You know what I mean? And if you're just going to watch something and just take it at face value and say, okay, like I've seen things on the news that fly in the face of what you're seeing in your neighborhood, like or in your grocery store. And the fact that so many people will just accept that, to me, is frightening, because we've become sheep. So yes, we should be watching. I watch various different news channels, right? Both sides. But I try to avoid the news because it's frustrating, to be candidly. I'd rather watch podcasts and read on, stuff. But even when I believe something that someone is saying, I still will go out of my way to verify that or to see if it's accurate. And I think the problem is that you have so many people that are just either too lazy or they just don't care that they're not doing that. And that's why we have such a divided country and, candidly, such a divided continent. When you look what's happening right now between the U.S. and Canada, I think if people would just stop and listen and try to understand better than just listening and, and taking that at face value, that we would all be better off. And I think all of our mental health would be a lot better, frankly.
I wholeheartedly agree with you. Well, let's digress a little bit and talk about Canada-U.S. relations in the last little while. So I'm somebody who, like I said, I'm a fan of President Trump's, and I don't disagree with what he's doing. His overall macro policy of raising tariffs to help lower the American trade deficit to zero is a smart policy, and he should do it. He also believes that the U.S. has put up with countries imposing their own high tariffs on U.S. goods. So that's hurt American businesses over a period of decades. I believe the annual trade deficit, globally speaking, is approaching $1 trillion or so, at least in the $700-800 billion a year range. So Trump wants that to go down to zero. He wants to use tariffs to raise revenue so he can lower taxes on people. All those make sense. If you look at Canada, the trade deficit between Canada and the U.S., though, is comparatively speaking minor. I think it's in the neighborhood of $35-40 billion. And if you take energy out of that equation, which is basically oil and gas, because we ship a lot of oil and gas to you guys, then we actually have a trade deficit with you. There's about a $30-40 billion deficit the other way in goods. So America sells more goods to Canada than it buys from Canada. So those are some things that I think a lot of Americans don't understand. And from President Trump's point of view, the other thing he says is that the United States is funding Canada's defense, and Canada needs to increase its defense spending from under 1% of GDP to 2% of GDP, which it has agreed to do as a NATO member, but has never followed through on. So I understand what the president is saying. I understand why he wants to do it. But I have to tell you, I'm not sure he or his staff understand how all that's being perceived by average people. Never mind what the media is telling them. There's a lot of people that work in trade-driven industries here in Canada. They're scared shitless. These tariffs could cause their jobs to disappear. That's what a lot of people are a little bit frightened of. And The other thing that as a Canadian, I'll tell you, and look, I don't have a hard opinion on this one way or another. I think I understand what he's doing, as I said, and I understand why our people feel the way they do. But many Canadians feel like, hey, listen, when the chips have been down, America's always been able to count on Canada. After 9/11, a lot of Americans were stranded, and
That's
our
right.
Maritimers took them into their own homes and fed them like family until things opened up again and they could go home. Canadian soldiers were among the first to go to Afghanistan to fight alongside American soldiers after 9/11. And they're just going, we've been your best and most faithful neighbor. How could you do this to us? That's kind of how it's coming across. I get it. Justin Trudeau is an idiot. He's gone now. Mark Carney is not an idiot, but he's still a Marxist, and hopefully he's going to call an election and lose it, and he'll be gone now, and there'll be a conservative in charge. But I think it's very important for Americans to understand why Canadians feel the way they feel, and it's also very important for President Trump to be speaking to people, hopefully with Carney gone and a conservative in place, that'll help him come to a deal that makes everybody feel good. America is right to complain that Canada's borders are far too lax and far too open. And I'm sure as someone in law enforcement, you have something to say about that because you've experienced some of that. But Canada also, needs to step up its military spending. My own belief is we shouldn't just raise it to 2% of GDP. We should raise it to 5% of GDP. We need to have troops and assets in the Arctic to prevent the Russians and the Chinese from encroaching on us. I think that's super, super important. And we'll feel better if we have a more muscular military than we currently do. But it would be remiss of me as a Canadian, as an intelligent observer of the scene, not to say this to folks like yourself and to President Trump, that guys, there's a way to do this with someone who has been a true friend and a true ally to the United States, not just for a little while, but for decades. Decades.
Well, if I can chime in, I'll tell you this. But I lived in Canada for 2 years. I traveled, like I said, from Manitoba to, I was screeched in Newfoundland.
Nice.
So I enjoyed the culture. But every single place that I had gone in Canada, I would have a chance to speak with police officers or soldiers from up there because we did some training and whatnot. And sometimes it'd be over beers where people were just really, they just let their true sentiments out. And it was never a sense of anything but love for one another. And I mean that. I mean, for country, like the Canadian respect. What I was amazed about is how many Canadian youth know more about American history than American youth, right? So I get it. Canada respects the United States. And I truly believe that the feeling is absolutely mutual. So I was really moved by the people up there. I have deep, deep, deep respect for Canada. I love the Canadian flag. And I loved how when I traveled throughout Canada, I would see that flag flying more often than I see the U.S. flag flying here in the United States. So I respect the patriotism of Canada. Look, Donald Trump is a New Yorker, and he's like an in-your-face New Yorker, and I think that's how he operates, and I'm sure some of this is what he's saying to try to get a good deal. But I did hear yesterday that, was it Premier Ford from Ontario, whose brother was the mayor of Toronto when I was assigned up there. I guess he's going to be meeting with the Commerce Secretary, and they had good conversations.
Howard Lutnick,
I think that this is all part of Donald Trump's strategy. Look, I'm a New Yorker, as you can tell, and I've traveled throughout the United States. Like I was assigned in different places. And the only place where they really understood me was Miami because so many New Yorkers now live in South Florida. Honestly, a lot of places where I worked, people didn't like New Yorkers because we're direct and sometimes perhaps impolite, even though our intentions are pure. And I think that's what people will find out with Donald Trump is, look, he's doing what he does. He's rattling cages to try to get a good deal. But I don't think he disrespects the Canadian people at all.
No, I don't think so either.
I agree with his delivery at times, not necessarily, but I'm not as successful or as smart as him in many other ways either. I don't think that he wants to divide Americans and Canadians. You guys we're the same. I mean, in so many different ways. When I was living up there, in many ways, I felt like I was just living here. I mean, the values are the same. People have the same desires for their families and, for their survival. So I just think that we're so similar that hopefully this blows over quickly. But I'll tell you this too. People in the United States are scared because he's very bold in what he does. And again, I believe he has a strategy. But when you hear about, like, for example, our 401ks took a big hit over the past few days, all these government employees being fired. I mean, that's going to do things to the economy as well, because now you're going to have a lot of people who are going to be without jobs, and those people have kids and wives. So, I mean, people in the United States are also worried. And I just hope that his strategy is one that, and I'm sure he's thought it through, that will be successful for both of our countries and for all the people that live in both countries.
I think in the long run it will be.
I would like to see, I hope so. I would like to see the European nations doing more with NATO, to be honest with you, though, because it's their backyard, and it seems like that, they're expecting the United States, and now if Canada increases their thing to 5%, well, it'd be nice to see some of those countries, because they're much closer to Russia and to the threat, doing their part.
Well, I'll tell you this. I agree with you on Europe. Europe needs to step up its game. Outside of Poland and I think the UK, nobody else is at 2%. So they're going to have to step up their game. Trump's going to push for it, and they're going to come forward and do it because he's tough that way. And I agree with you that Donald Trump is an in-your-face guy, and I agree with you that this is part of his negotiating strategy. I've seen that coming all along. All I'm saying to you is that there's a couple things that I'd like to see change in this 51st state.
Yeah, no.
Business. He's got to just cut that crap out. Like, I know he's trolling Trudeau, and now he's trolling Carney, and Carney hates him as much as Trudeau hated him. So I get all that. I'm just telling you, the average Canadian is deeply insulted by that. Deeply, deeply, deeply insulted by that. He's got to cut it out. That's not, you want to nail the government, guys? I'm all for it. I'm all for having these guys be hammered, belittled, humiliated, especially if they're with the Liberal Party, the so-called Liberal Party. There's nothing liberal about them. They're fascists, in my opinion. They should be renamed the new Fascist Party of Canada. They cannot use the honored name Liberal. Liberal is someone who's a freedom lover. These guys are freedom haters. They're absolute fascists. But the average Canadian person needs something different, because this is offensive and upsetting to them. And I'm just telling you that it's not.
No, I agree. I agree. Look, the Canadians deserve to be proud, and I'll tell you, I know each province has its sense of pride, and sometimes that pride conflicts with other provinces. I lived it. I enjoyed it. It's the same thing in the United States: New York, New Jersey, New York, Connecticut. But yeah, I would like to see this all behind us and for us to move on. But yeah, I agree that it's not appropriate to insult people, and especially a nation of people who were, like I said, have the same values that we have. And yeah, look, we have our own problem with some of our parties down here too, who are pretty much on the threshold of being communists. So I mean, yeah, we should clean up our own house before we start pointing fingers at other countries, especially countries who have been very, very good to us throughout, the decades, for over 100 years,
Yeah. 100%. You've given me an idea. I think I might create a little video. I'm going to call my video producer and say, look, we're going to create a little video with a voiceover, and I'm going to send this. I'm going to put it out there, and I'm even willing to put money behind boosting it so it gets out there. But I want to create a little viral video to say, hey, we love you, America. These are the things we agree with you on, which is a lot. This is the one thing we don't agree with you on. So cut it out, sir. Please. And that's that, as far as I'm concerned. But great to hear your thoughts on all this. So I wonder if we can move on to another topic. Sure. Do you know any of the key people in law enforcement in the current Trump administration? I'm talking Attorney General Bondi, FBI Director Kash Patel, Deputy Director Dan Bongino. Do you know these people? What do you know about them? What are your thoughts on them?
I met the director, Attorney General Bondi, like I said, after the Parkland shooting, but I had very, very limited interaction with her. I apologize for that noise, I think. But I do know the current acting head of the DEA right now, Derek Waltz, good guy. His brother was killed in action in Afghanistan, was an Air Force Special Forces soldier. Derek is about as patriotic and as straight shooting as they come. He's a dear friend. And I know he was an agent in New York when I was an agent in New York. And if you mention Derek's name in the New York Field Division of DEA, people will light up. I mean, he was so well loved and respected. Another gentleman, Anthony Salisbury, who's in the administration, as a senior advisor in the Department of Homeland Security. Also very, very well respected guy. Dan Bongino, I only know through his show, very opinionated. I agree with much of what he says. I disagree with some, but we'll see how he does. And as for Kesh Patel, I know people who know him. They say he's a very decent man, but I don't know enough about him to give an opinion. But the people who tell me he's a decent man are people who I trust. So how they perform, I guess, is what we should judge them about. Because again, just like we were talking about before, the news media, they all have opinions, and the opinions are so jaded and often so wrong that I just prefer to judge them based on how they conduct their business. After raising their hand to that Constitution that we spoke of earlier.
Yeah, 100%. So this friend of yours with the DEA, tell me more about him.
He was good agent. He was in New York, was a supervisor in New York. He commanded the New York Drug Enforcement Task Force for a while. Like I said, beloved up there. Then he went on to run DEA Special Operations Division, which is kind of like part of their intelligence structure within the Drug Enforcement Administration, had a global footprint. And look, he retired from DEA some time ago, and since then was a big advocate to help families who were struggling with loss due to fentanyl. So, I mean, it's the whole concept of keeping people safe from illicit substances is something that's been near and dear to his heart for decades. Again, after his government service, he continued that. And I was really happy to hear that he got tapped to come back and be part of the administration, because again, I know his intentions are pure and I know him well. The others I know Anthony Salisbury a little bit, but enough to know that he's a good guy. And the others, I only know of their reputation from others. And like Pam Bondi, got a good feel for her on that first interaction, but I only met her that one time. So, we'll see what she does. I know her reputation in Florida was quite good when I lived in Florida.
Yeah. I've heard really good things about her as well. Well, I really hope that this whole Jeffrey Epstein situation is handled with some transparency, because so far it looks like people are stonewalling this inside the agency.
No, it's appalling to me because, look, the most important resource we have as human beings, right? I mean, I don't care what country you live in, but especially in a civilized part of the world, is our future, our children, right? Yeah. And here are people who were misusing, abusing, sexually abusing children. If we're not going to hold them accountable, or if there's some people that we think are worth protecting who did that to children, then I will question the integrity of the system once again, because there's no excuse to protect people who sexually abused and stained for the rest of their lives. Children, teenagers, I don't care what age they were. They're not adults, hands off. And people who did inappropriate things need to be held accountable. I mean, no one's been arrested, you know what I mean? Other than Epstein himself and Ghislaine Maxwell, no one else has been arrested. And that's, to me, beyond appalling.
It is. It absolutely is. And there's also a lot of suspicion around the release of the JFK, RFK, and MLK files. I don't know if there's any there to be had, but I sure would like to see what those internal documents look like.
Well, no, I couldn't agree with you more. I mean, that's quarter of a century or more old. So, I mean, how long do you need to keep them secret? And I'll go one step further. I would like to see the report on the Saudi connection to the 9/11 attacks released. I mean, people are still dying from the World Trade. I lost my right lung as being a first responder to September 11th. I was there when the second plane hit. I've lost many. I lost 6 friends on that day. I've lost more than 3 times that number to 9/11 related disease since. So the fact that that's still being kept from the American public, to me, is quite appalling. I mean, there are some things that I understand need to be kept secret, and then there are some things that you wonder why. And the things you mentioned are why. And the Saudi connection to 9/11, why? If there's an ugly secret there that might embarrass some people, perhaps they deserve to be embarrassed.
I couldn't have said it better myself. So, Peter, you're out of government service now, and you've got a book out. Why don't we talk a bit about that?
Sure. I wrote a book called The Deadly Path, and the subtitle is How Operation Fast and Furious and Bad Lawyers Armed Mexican Cartels. And it talks about the 3 years that I spent in Phoenix leading up to Operation Fast and Furious. And I talk about some cases that we tried to get people prosecuted that were pretty heinous cases. I mean, you'll see the dead bodies started to amass in Phoenix long before Operation Fast and Furious even started. And we couldn't get the prosecutors to cooperate with us at all. And then, like I said, our mission had changed. And then Operation Fast and Furious itself started. And then I blew the whistle on that situation. And then I talk about what happened afterwards. My wife and I were nearly bankrupted. I spent 4 years fighting to clear my name and eventually did. And then got back to work and later promoted to some of the highest levels in ATF. Again, my result was a lot different than many other whistleblowers in government. The fact that I was able to promote to the senior levels of ATF is unusual. So I talk about all the different factors, the early prosecutors that were involved. I talk about the people who was in ATF that had problems with me telling the truth. But I also give credit to the people who did the right thing, because there were many. And look, it's funny. I wrote the book to tell a story because, like we spoke of earlier, the media told either the Republican version of events or the Democrat version of events. And the truth is nowhere near what was reported on, because they wanted to point fingers at different politicians. So it was really a preventive measure so that it doesn't happen again. And it was also to tell other people that were with ATF during that time, because we never told what happened even internally. When we proposed doing some training, let's talk about Fast and Furious internally, so it would never happen again. We were always told we don't talk about Fast and Furious. So I wanted to set the record straight. It's an apolitical book. It just tells the facts of what I saw, no speculation or anything like that. And we'll see what happens. But just the truth had to be told.
Amen. Are you going on a book tour? Are you going on a speaking tour? What else are you doing with this? I
hadn't gone on much of a tour, frankly, because I lost a lot of money blowing the whistle on Fast and Furious. So I need a day job, so to speak. So I have gone and speaking. I've done speaking engagements at law enforcement academies. I've done some speaking engagements at the Federal Law Enforcement Training Center here in the United States. And again, it's to get the message out so that folks don't make this mistake. But it's not really, to me, about book sales. It's about telling the story. The good news is there has been some Hollywood interest. I don't want to jinx anything. So, that would be nice, because that would really get the story out there. Because unfortunately today, not a lot of people read books. So it's the speaking about what happened there and, doing things like this podcast that help get the message out, frankly.
Peter, everyone says that, and there are people as a whole are reading fewer books. But if you go look at the actual numbers, book sales are holding pretty steady. They haven't plummeted. Part of the reason is more and more people are buying books as audiobooks. So audiobook sales are really taking off in a big way, and that's keeping them pretty buoyant. And outside of the United States and Canada, book sales in India and in the Far East are booming.
Really?
Booming, yeah. Yeah, so you'd be shocked, but if you go and you do your research, you'll see that the actual number of books being sold a year has held pretty steady. It's even increasing a little bit, like 1%, 2% a year. So there hasn't been a collapse in readership the way people think there has been.
Well, I'd like to see more books being read in the United States and Canada, in our part of the world. I think that's one thing where I would argue that we could be doing, not saying Canada, the United States could be doing a lot better with education and people valuing reading things. And I know that's something that they're working on now. But like I said, when I was up in Canada, I was amazed at how many young Canadian neighbors I had, or how many soldiers or cops I dealt with that could tell me a lot more about American history than the average American that I knew. I was always a big history guy. I loved history. So I'd sit there and listen to these folks, and I'm like, wow, it's nice that they know stuff that my neighbors don't know.
That's amazing. So what is your day job these days? What are you up to?
I work for Amazon. I'm not supposed to talk about what I do there because they have they're very sensitive. But so I work in their corporate security realm. And, when I'm not doing that, I try to do some public speaking. I speak occasionally at the 9/11 Memorial and Museum in Manhattan about what I experienced on September 11th and the lung cancer. Because I want people to know, look, I went through this thing that a lot of law enforcement and military folks go through, where I had some things I was carrying with me from that day that I let weigh on me for a long time. And I always believed, hey, I was a law enforcement guy. Like, I'm not the person that asked for help. People come to me for help. So I had this stupid belief that it would have been cowardly to talk about it with a professional. And it wasn't until many, many years later when I finally did that I felt like my world had like I was just living inside my head for far too long. And lost a lot of time with family, a lot of time with kids as a result of just pondering things. And, so now I want people to realize that when you ask for help and you get it, that you can get your life back. So I try to advocate for that. And again, I talk about Fast and Furious and ethics in law enforcement, because people need to realize you can't fix what you're not willing to talk about. And when you bury scandals and when you don't like talk and speak truth to power sometimes, then things just don't get fixed.
Amen. Amen. Beautifully said. So, Peter, we end every episode by asking you, our guest expert, for your top 3 expert action steps. These are your 3 best pieces of advice to help my listener elevate their life or business success. In bullet point form, what do you say?
3 things. I guess the only thing that you bring to the grave with you is your reputation. So always strive to protect your reputation. And then when I say strive to protect your reputation is, 1, always try to do the right thing, right? And own your mistakes. And if someone tries to assail your reputation and they're wrong, defend yourself, number 1. Number 2, we'll go back to what I just said. We all go through our peaks and our valleys. And if you find yourself in a dark place, it's not wrong to ask for help. So, I mean, and it doesn't have to be PTSD or something like that. I mean, even if you need help in something, business development or something, there's people out there who would love to help you. Ask for help. And then along those same lines, bullet point number 3 would be take care of yourself first, but do that knowing that if you do that appropriately, then you can take care of your family and you can take care of the people who work with you or for you. So it's really about just always trying to do the right thing. You never go wrong by doing the right thing.
Amen. You never go wrong by doing the right thing. So, listener, Peter Forcelli is the real deal. His book, The Deadly Path, is a book you should read. Don't just buy a copy for yourself. Buy 5 copies, 10 copies, and hand them out as gifts to the people that you love. And the lessons that he's given us out of sharing his powerful story of being someone who was willing to stand up for what's right and for the truth, being a whistleblower against the arrayed forces of government, and doing the right thing and making sure that the wrong thing would be harder for people to do going forward is inspiring. And if you know someone who needs to be inspired, share this episode with them. Peter, thanks for coming on the show. A real honor to have you here, my friend.
Honored to be here. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, you bet. And that wraps up another exciting episode of the podcast, The Thought Leader Revolution. To find out more about today's guest, the one and only Peter Forcelli, go to the show notes at thethoughtleaderrevolution.com or wherever you happen to listen to this episode, be it iTunes, Google Play, Audible, Spotify, or what have you. Until next time, goodbye.
This episode has been brought to you by eCircleAcademy.com, the proven system to add 6 to 7 figures a year to your thought leader practice.